Hi, this is a video to clarify some points on cybernetics and second order cybernetics. It's just a read through of some of the work that I've done. Literally, I'm just going to read some of my work, and hopefully that will provide an explanation for people who are wanting to know more about cybernetics. I apologize that there's no animation or photos or pictures. It's really boring. However, it's just meant to be a verbal or an auditory video. So here goes. Right, the first thing I would like to say is a description of a thing is not that thing. The description is not the thing described. So that's kind of like the precursor to this, because we've got to be careful of defining things, especially in terms of cybernetics. However, we still want to be able to describe cybernetics. So the reason why I have made this video is wanted to share these ideas with you, especially since I have a website which many people ask me the same question: what is cybernetics? So I'm just going to read what my explanation is. Cybernetics is not a new field. There's often a radical misconception about the nature of cybernetics. Many think of it as something to do with cyberspace, like something to do with computers of some sort. Others think it's to do with robots or androids, some sort of mind control. There are even books that have misleading titles, such as Psycho Cybernetics. Another one's called Hypno Cybernetics. So whether it's titles of books or Japanese anime you'll see on YouTube, there's cybernetics animation. Nothing to do with cybernetics though. They just use the term cybernetics. So I believe there's a major misconception about cybernetics, and that is why I have read out this video, because I also don't see a lot of cybernetics in the universities, maybe in individual subjects here and there, but it's not a view. Because universities, especially mainstream universities, tend to take a Western linear view. Right. It's important to explain to the readers or the viewers that when you are describing cybernetics, especially second order cybernetics, we need to understand the author's view of cybernetics. For example, if you're yourself going to be doing research in cybernetics, how does the reader know that you understand cybernetics? So that's why usually in cybernetics we will explain to the reader or author, to the reader, what the author's view of cybernetics is. So let's start with cybernetics. What is cybernetics? Okay, so this is a simple question, but not really. The American Society for Cybernetics held their 50th anniversary in 2014. This conference was at George Washington University. And at this conference, they had the past presidents of the society sitting on the stage. And somebody from the audience said, "What is cybernetics?" Now, surely, think about it. They've been going for 50 years, and the past presidents are sitting there, the big thinkers in cybernetics. And somebody asked them a simple question: what is cybernetics? And there were giggles heard from the audience in the gallery of the lecture hall at the George Washington University, as those who are cyberneticians or cyberneticists, whichever term you prefer, cybernetician or a cyberneticist, we know the trouble of this question. So I say, surely for a society that has been running for 50 years, there would be agreement on the answer to this common question. Yet there is not. And I believe there are two reasons for this difficulty in answering the title question of what is cybernetics. And the first reason is that cybernetics does not have a home discipline. So Gordon Pask stated, cybernetics, like applied mathematics, cuts across the entrenched departments of natural science, the sky, the earth, the animals and plants. Its interdisciplinary character emerges when it considers economy not as an economist, biology not as a biologist, engines not as an engineer. In each case, its themes remain the same, namely how systems regulate themselves, reproduce themselves, evolve and learn. Its high spot is the question of how they organize themselves. So I'm sure you can start to see that with so many different people in the field of cybernetics, or so many different disciplines, the definition of what is cybernetics will be coming from so many different angles. That's the first problem. So as I say, with such a diverse spread of people in their subject areas, it is difficult to describe a what is to a simple question. So let's unpack this a little bit more. The Greek word kybernetes, which is translated into English, means pilot or steersman. The term cybernetics was coined by mathematician Norbert Wiener in 1948 and was described in his book Communication and Control in the Animal and Machine. In Wiener's model, cybernetics adheres to the laws of physics. His view of cybernetics had limitations, but from his coinage, the path had been laid for increased scope of cybernetic thinking, specifically at the Macy conferences, which occurred from 1946 to 1953, where new themes were introduced, including patterns. Now, these are points in cybernetics: patterns, regularity, and feedback, which translated into circular causality. Now, that's a major theme in cybernetics, specifically second order cybernetics, with the awareness of the observer in systems. Now, that's the separation there. In first order cybernetics, we understood systems and they were connected. Once we put the observer in the system as well, we now say the observer in the system. A new chapter of cybernetics emerged, and that was the second order. The minute the observing system, the person who's seeing the system, is included in that system, we now look at the second order of cybernetics. This brought the observer into the system. The observer needs to be accounted for. For example, anthropologist, ethnographer, and cybernetician Margaret Mead, who studied people and their cultures, realized that her mere presence in their company was impacting the behaviors she experienced. Mead was also a forerunner to second order cybernetics. In Mead's case, whether it be that the cohort acted differently to impress her, please her, or even anger her, her presence altered what she observed, the observer effect. With the growth in constructivist narrations, observer-dependent realities, and recursive relationships, so too did cybernetics evolve. Many cyberneticians are also constructivists and vice versa, as there is some overlap, particularly in Glosserfeld's radical constructivism and the theme of reflexivity. Cybernetics is vested in principles that are used to formulate a cybernetic understanding of phenomena. So defining cybernetics is troubling. Hence, for this study, this little video, the definitions used are of those of the cyberneticians who have influenced my own work. So I have listed the person and the best definition of cybernetics. And Heinz von Furst provides what I believe to be the second reason for why cybernetics does not have a universal definition. So Heinz von Furst's definition of cybernetics is as follows. He says, that is the fascinating thing about cybernetics. You ask a couple of people to give you a definition, and although you don't get to know much about cybernetics from them, you find out a lot about the person supplying the definition, including their area of expertise, their relation to the world, their desire to play with metaphors, their enthusiasm for management, and their interest in communication or message theory. So what is Heinz von Furster telling us? He's telling us that the minute somebody tries to define something or tell you about something, they're actually telling you about themselves, because they're telling you about their observation. Therefore, if I say to you, here's a definition of cybernetics, it is A, B, C, D. I'm not telling you the definition of cybernetics. I'm telling you my interpretation of cybernetics, which brings us back to the beginning of this little video. A description of a thing is not that thing. The description is not the thing being described. So this is a common problem, especially with students studying cybernetics, is what is cybernetics? There is the need to put it into a module and try to make a theory of it. And the problem with cybernetics is it's not a module. One shouldn't think of it as a type of module, like you'll study the psychodynamic module, model, sorry, or the medical model. But cybernetics isn't a model. So you can't say cybernetics is such and such and such, put it on a pedestal and then describe it, because that is exactly against the principle of cybernetics, being you are connected to the very thing you are describing. You see, it is observer dependent. Okay, moving on. So Ranulph Glanville, his definition was cybernetics is essentially about circularity. And Ranulph told me that he believes the reason for why there is cybernetics is because of error. If there was no error in the world, there would be no need for cybernetics. Humberto Maturana, he says, I propose the phrase the art and science of human understanding for cybernetics. Why? The person that guides the ship. You see, we're coming back here to steersman, the skipper. Remember, I told you that the word kybernetes is Greek, meaning steersman. You see, the person that guides the ship, the skipper, acts both on practical know-how and intuition. Thus, the skipper acts both as a scientist and as an artist. Varela says, first order cybernetics, the cybernetics of observed systems. Second order cybernetics, the cybernetics of observing systems. You can see the difference there. The first one is you observe something and you describe it. The second one is you observe your observing. So Gregory Bateson also said the study of form and pattern. Now, if you go to the ASC's website, you will find at least 20 more definitions of cybernetics, and I haven't chosen the best because I can't choose the best, because this is just my opinion. These are the ones which made sense to me in terms of the study that I was doing on cybernetics. So let's go look at a little bit of history, how cybernetics came about. Cybernetics. In earlier times, the things a person had to understand were relatively uncomplicated. The objects or systems were relatively simple. Tools such as spears, a hand axe, awls, harpoons, etc. were limited in their principle of operation. Until quite recently, it was possible for a person to study a significant portion of the knowledge that was available at that time. More recently, in the last 70 years, there has almost been an exponential growth in complexity of systems that humans were concerned with. The outpacing ability for humans to control their systems is evident with the requirement for people to specialize in their field, with several specialists required for a common everyday system. Energy systems such as power plants, traffic control systems, even a motor vehicle car workshops require people with several specializations before the workshop can cater for the needs of their customers. You see, the complexity in the world has increased. In the 1940s, the themes of regulation and control were becoming more prominent with the development of more complex systems. With the increasing variety of behaviors that these systems could perform, the more the people who were working on these systems needed to know. Ashby's law of requisite variety states that only variety can match, absorb, or destroy variety. As systems become more complex, so too must the controller also become more complex, owing to the more functions the controller needs to regulate. Many definitions of cybernetics relate to regulation of systems, owing to the challenge we face in managing these systems. Remember, I described earlier that the reason for cybernetics is the management of errors. If there were no errors in the world, we would not have no reason or purpose for cybernetics, I believe. The human body is probably one of the most advanced regulators of behavior, with its ability for homeostasis. The human brain, which is physical in nature, provides us with the ability for abstract thinking. The union between the physical and the abstract, the mind, which is like the meeting place between science and philosophy. Cybernetician Warren McCulloch found a new field called experimental epistemology, which is a physiological theory of knowledge, crossroads between mind and body. The mind is part of nature and should not be excluded just because of its complexity. The early cyberneticians were aware of the increasing complexity in the world, complexity in neurophysiology, mathematics, and various other disciplines. These early cyberneticians, while from different fields of specialization, had a few common grounds that linked them together. A new epistemology emerged that was applicable to biology, social systems, and computing, that was in contrast to the view put forward by physics. Cybernetics became quite popular in various fields, including mathematics, science, engineering, biology, and therapy. So now we can, reviewing this, we can see that cybernetics can be used as a way of thinking in terms of biology, engineering, in terms of regulation and control, in therapy as an approach, mathematics. So this is why the defining of cybernetics becomes challenging, because once again, I have now exemplified for you the range that cybernetics can reach. Cybernetics is not confined to a single field. That is why the question of what is cybernetics is challenging. That's the first reason. The second reason is because how do we define something that we are connected to? It means that we are present in that definition. And if every person has their own definition of cybernetics, we can now see there are hundreds of millions, well, actually 7 billion definitions of cybernetics. If everybody in the world had to come up with a definition, I'm sure there would be some similarity. Second order cybernetics, continuing with this little historical review. The formal origin of second-order cybernetics occurred between 1968 and 1976 with the first symposium of the American Society for Cybernetics taking place in 1968, where Margaret Mead presented her paper titled The Cybernetics of Cybernetics. Now, this is the same as this is close to second-order cybernetics. Now, the reason I say close to is because it has been used interchangeably. Second order cybernetics or cybernetics of cybernetics. Now, the reason why I say it's close to is Margaret Mead spoke of the cybernetics of cybernetics, whereas others, such as Hans van Furst, spoke of second order cybernetics. Underlying these two approaches is the same thing, observer being present in the system. It's just that to acknowledge the person who was the main, let's call it, trajectory in this thinking, we can see there is a slight difference between Margaret Mead's view and Hans van Furster's view of second order cybernetics versus cybernetics of cybernetics. But in to a layman, they're the same thing. So I've used the word I've used the term cybernetics of cybernetics because Margaret Mead had a slightly different way of thinking of cybernetics, and that was that we need to remember that cybernetics of cybernetics must be demonstrated. And that's what Margaret Mead's thesis was, is that we can't just think cybernetically. We need to think and live cybernetically. So when I think of the terms cybernetics of cybernetics, it reminds me of Margaret Mead's premise of your actions should reflect your thinking, and your thinking should reflect your actions. It doesn't help if you think cybernetically, but then go and act, in a linear fashion. So there will be a mismatch between your thinking and your action. And just as I spoke about Aristotle, or actually, sorry, I haven't spoken about Aristotle. It was earlier in the text. Aristotle spoke about phronesis and Sophia, and the one is having a theoretical knowledge, and the other is having a practical knowledge. And we can't say that theory is more important than practice, and we can't say practice is more important than theory. They're both important. So the point of Margaret Mead's cybernetics of cybernetics is that the thinking and the example of the thinking need to correlate. Right. While as Hans van Furster obviously would agree, but his view was talking more from the observer's point of view. So he spent a lot of time talking about observers. but together these two form cybernetics of cybernetics, or second order cybernetics, and I hope this has not confused you. The key points in this paper of Margaret Mead's Cybernetics of Cybernetics is that the key points in this paper challenges people to use cybernetics as a way of seeing the world with an ecological approach. However, this thinking was already present in the manner in which Bateson used language and his awareness of the unavoidability of the observer, as well as the works of Stafford Beer. Behind all of these developments in second-order cybernetics, Heinz von Furster is a notable person. The development of second-order cybernetics into an approach is mainly attributed to Heinz von Furster, Humberto Maturana, Francisco Varela, Gordon Pask, Ranulph Glanville, Bernard Scott, and Dionysius Kallikurdes. Second-order cybernetics arises when cybernetics is applied to the subject of cybernetics. Commonly found themes in cybernetics include learning, purpose, conversation, observation, and objects. Cybernetics of cybernetics sees studies about learning, the purpose of learning, conversing about conversing, observing our own observing, and the object of objects. In this way, a recursive, reflexive approach is taken. Second-order cybernetics provides a conceptual framework with sufficient depth to analyze second-order processes such as dialogue, cognition, and socio-cultural interactions. Second-order cybernetics is not the same as postmodernism. Second-order cybernetics generates a structure to permit and support this epistemology. The presence of the observer is acknowledged and is part of the process and structure. It is not a nihilistic approach, and while some harsh critics of postmodernism claim an anything goes stance, the same is not true for cybernetics. Second order cybernetics and constructivism do still have strong ties, though. Jean Piaget, who Ernst von Glossopel believed was the great pioneer of constructivist theory, has found common ground between these two approaches. Constructivism is concerned with how stable concepts may arise from the individual observings, while second-order cybernetics studies observing as opposed to observed systems. The term cybernetics was coined in 1948. However, cybernetic thinking has been present for over a millennium. For example, the ideas of circularity and connectedness have been exhibited in Huayan Buddhism. Okay, I hope that has provided some background to cybernetics. I will do further videos on cybernetics. Just a note, please. I know this video might be very boring. Its intention was just to be a read-through of some of the work which I have compiled, and for those people who are interested to listen. Thanks for watching, or shall I say thanks for listening.